Hello and welcome to another episode of Repeat That Again, Please. I'm your host, Genelle Aldred, and the episode today, I think, is short, a bit of a slow burn, but it's rich and intense as we get to the end. And I think even if in the beginning you think, where is this going? Listen right through to the end. You'll be really glad that you did. And that's because the conversation goes right to the heart of what I want Repeat That Again to be all about conversations that make us happier, healthier, and more connected as a society. I initially wanted to do a conversation with a behavioural scientist about the long-term effects of lockdown on all of us, especially here in the UK, but also wider abroad. And in my search for that, I've stumbled across different really interesting people. And today's guest, I came across her website, I came across her work, I came across her socials, and we began on a conversation which the entry point to it, as the entry point to this conversation today, was about the links between stress and physical pain. And that's pain that can't be explained by anything medical. And through the course of the conversation, and it wasn't long, but we went through and actually we got to the heart of why so many of us are feeling just not quite well. And that's despite rest, despite mindfulness, despite doing all the things and pulling all the levers that we have of making us feel more grounded, more at one with ourselves, more accepting, more content with life. I do all of those things. However, sometimes you still feel like despite that, you're on a cycle of building, and then crash and burn. And whenever we feel those joyful moments and our heart feels full, it seems like they kind of get snatched away. It almost feels like there's kind of a bit of a pullback in terms of the way that we feel, the way we want to feel, the work we do to get there. And then when we get there, it kind of seems to slip away from our grasp. And I don't know if you've felt that. I've definitely experienced it. I'll meditate, I'll do my mindfulness, I'll get my wins, and I'll do everything. But it feels like a constant battle to try and hold on to that feeling. And what we began to explore is some of the micro and macro things in our environment that actually means we are living often in a low level state of stress constantly, even when we don't feel it, and the impact that that has. And where we ended up talking about belonging, community, gratitude, the things that I've been talking about and the levers I'm pulling on, but approaching it from a slightly different aspect has been mind-altering for me, because it's making me think about the way I do approach my wellness and my well-being to live the kind of full life that I'm longing to live and living in part, but I'd like to enter into more fully. So if you felt that feeling, this is an episode for you. And the guest I have is amazing guest and well placed to speak into this, because she is a behavioural scientist with an interdisciplinary background, and her work involves quantitative research on human happiness, physical pain, and behaviour. And she integrates methods from psychology and behavioural economics. She explores how psychosocial and socioeconomic factors shape mental and physical well-being. Dr. Lucía Macchia is currently a lecturer at City University of London, a visiting fellow in the Department of Psychological and Behavioural Science at the London School of Economics, and she's a research affiliate at the Wellbeing Research Centre at the University of Oxford. She is well placed and also, more importantly, well researched to talk about this topic today. And it's so interesting that even when we go through to the data, even when we go through the academic work, where we end up is that happiness is so much more than just work, rest, play. And I was so intrigued to talk to her, hear her responses. And the way I've recorded the episode this time around is I've actually recorded them as a batch. And it's so interesting to be able to go back, edit the episode, and actually re-listen to the conversation with almost fresh ears and fresh eyes, and to get something completely new out of it, a bit different to when you're actually having the conversation, editing it straight away and putting it out that week. And that's why I know this is a slow burn episode, but it's one that once you get into the meat of it, that slow burn foundation build that we do, allows you to enter into something really, really enriching. I am loving Repeat That Again, please. I hope you are too. And I really hope that you enjoy this episode. Hello, Lucia. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I'm going to dive straight into the questions because your research, and we'll put a link to the papers in the show notes, is around physical pain and stress. And I think this is something that we actually understand it on a level, because I think we kind of know that when you're stressed, you feel pain.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also something that we kind of don't know. So I think we kind of know, but we also don't quite believe, because for most of us, we don't have access to the data that says it's not just something that we feel, that your mum says or your granny says, oh, you've got that because of this. It's actually a very, very real thing. And so wanted to just uncover that for people today, and especially for people going through it or who know people going through it, just to talk about that connection between physical pain and stress. And so the first question I really wanted to ask is, how do you define physical pain in your research, and what kinds of physical pains would you say are and are not included in stress-related pain?
So in this type of literature, when we talk about physical pain, we talk about the pain that cannot be medically explained or that doesn't have an underlying pathology. That's why we say that it's the pain that can be related to stress or a set of different emotions like worry, anger, stress, sadness, and so on. And the idea here is that there's a difference between the pain that comes from a physical injury or tissue damage and the pain that we talk about, which is the pain that cannot be explained by something that is happening specifically in the body, or the origin is not what's happening in the body. That's the pain we talk about here.
And what kind of physical pain would you not include in that? Is it simply just ones that can be explained? Because I suppose there's quite a lot of nuance within that of what can be explained when we're thinking about mitigating factors or links.
Yeah, so I would say the typical example is if you break your arm and you're in pain, go to the doctor. So all the strategies and all the science behind the stress-related pain will not help you with that. We are not speaking to you. So if you, and this is a big clarification in any aspect when we talk about this type of pain. So if you really feel pain, go to the doctor first. And then if there's no cause or they cannot find out what's going on, or if you have chronic pain for which further medical treatment cannot help you, you can come to these strategies and look at the science behind stress-related pain. So we include the pain that doesn't have an underlying pathology. We include chronic pain when we talk about strategies to mitigate that stress-related pain. We can talk about chronic pain that has a physical cause, but that became chronic and that's sustained for a long period of time. And then further medical treatment will not help you. So you can go to these strategies, the stress-related pain strategies, but we exclude the pain that can be solved with medical treatment.
And when we talk about stress, I would love to hear the definition of stress that you were using, because we understand stress, but we will use stress for anything from I'm running late for the train, I feel stressed, to I don't think I can meet my bills this month, I feel stressed, to my partner has left me, or my children are ill, or my parents are sick. So there's varying levels of stress, because what feels like high stress to me might not necessarily be considered high stress. But in terms of your research, I know there will be parameters. How are you defining the kind of stress? And also, how do you think it might differ from how we understand it?
Yeah, that's a very good point, because sometimes we put all negative emotions that we can feel under the umbrella term of stress. You mentioned a lot of life events. When we say negative emotions, we are not talking about emotions that are not useful. We are talking about emotions that are unpleasant. But the literature in which this topic fits talks about negative emotions. So going back to the stress definition, sometimes we classify as a lot of negative emotions like sadness, anger. For example, you get divorced, you might say, okay, I'm feeling stressed, but maybe you feel sadness and you think that you are feeling stress, but still a negative emotion. So when we look at that stress-related pain, we also look at other negative emotions, which are mental states that don't feel pleasant, that we would like to avoid feeling just because they don't feel nice. They can be useful, yes. They are information for us to take action or to make decisions or to even do something to feel better. But they are emotions that we don't want to feel somehow. And when we talk about the stress related pain, we also include all the other negative emotions that can be or cannot be associated with stress directly.
Because you often hear people talk about things like heartbreak,
Yeah.
like it being a physical feeling, which is not necessarily stress. It might be stress adjacent, but it's sadness, it's grief, and people would describe that as feeling physical.
Yes, and there's literature that talks about why we can take social pain, for example, through these life events, or we can consider it the same as physical pain. And that's because these two types of pain share brain mechanisms. And that's why, for example, the loss of a loved one can feel related to pain. So if I lose someone that I love, regardless of the reason, I might feel that sadness as pain. It might also feel physically painful to lose someone through potentially the sadness that that life event generates.
Taking the fact that stress is different for everyone, so there's probably not a single defining factor, and it's all the other things that contribute. But what do you think are some of the biggest societal pressures that contribute to stress-related physical pain?
I think, and comes from the findings of one of my very first papers on the topic, unemployment at the society level can have a big impact on people's pain. And we are not talking about whether one has a job or not, whether I am unemployed or unemployed. It's about people around me being employed or unemployed. For example, we found that people who live in a country with greater unemployment rate, where more people are unemployed, report greater pain than those who live in a country with lower unemployment rate. And that's pretty interesting because it's not about my employment. I might have a job myself and be very happy with my job, but then if everyone else is unemployed, I might still experience that pain. One question that can come after that finding is why that's the case. So why will I suffer from other people's suffering, let's say, or other people's disadvantaged situation? And one mechanism could be exactly what we were talking about. So the stress. So I might feel stressed because I might lose my job in the future if everyone else is losing their job right now. That might bring job insecurity, lack of control on my finances and my career and my life in general. So I would say the unemployment at the societal level is one societal factor that has strong impact on pain. Similar to financial crisis, for example, and the same mechanisms play a role in that link.
And it's so interesting because we're living in a time where there's a lot going on in the world. So there is that sense of some people feeling a great level of stress all the time because it feels like it's never ending. But besides those external pressures that happen at that kind of macro level, what are sometimes internal factors that play a role in that same stress that leads to physical pain?
So we can maybe highlight two factors. One is the typical biological processes. So you feel stress, you suffer or experience inflammation, and then that's pretty simple. And then the other one is the brain mechanisms. So social pain or stress and physical pain can share neural mechanisms or neural aspects that make us feel different things through the same or from the same event or the same driver. Those, I would say, those are the most important physical mechanisms or aspects that can happen internally in the body.
And what are some of those personal dynamics that
Mhm.
can happen to cause that level of stress? What comes up in your research the most?
Becoming unemployed oneself, that's one. So big life events, big changes in the main areas of life, for example, even having a child, that could generate pain in the future because that brings a lot of stress and a lot of more responsibilities. Getting divorced, losing a loved one, losing a friend, feeling that we don't belong to the group that we used to belong, that's another one. Those are social dynamics or personal dynamics that might also impact our feeling pain.
And what kind of physical pain do people who go through that, what are they reporting feeling? Like, is it feeling just generally unwell? Is it actually pinpointing a place in the body?
Mhm.
And also thinking about, you touched on the pain that becomes chronic. What are the kinds of things that people are reporting?
We usually, or most of the existing surveys, ask about pain in a general way. For example, did you experience any pain yesterday? From 0, 1, 0 meaning no pain, 1 meaning pain, or on a scale from 1 to 7, how much physical pain have you experienced in the last 4 weeks, or things like that. But when we look at the specific parts in the body where people report their pain, let's say the stars in that story are back pain and neck pain. And coincidentally, it's the part in the body in which we feel more tension when we feel stress, and we will feel that. The example that you gave at the beginning, you're in a rush and maybe 3 hours later you have neck pain because you were tensed due to that situation. We could say that yes, back pain and neck pain are the key aspects in this area.
And then if people have pain that becomes chronic, what could that look like? How could that start?
It could start in like any pain. The definition of chronic pain is the pain that is sustained over time. It can be 3 months, 6 months, depending on the pain, depending on the person, depending on the whole situation. But today you might have a stressful situation, or the accumulation of stressful situations. That's also a big predictor. Talking about the social circumstances, in one of my papers, we found that people who spend more time unemployed since they finish full-time education reported more pain than people who spend lower number of years unemployed. And that speaks to the chronic stress that can turn into chronic pain eventually. Something important to clarify is that all this accounts for health problems and other aspects that might influence the pain. Because one question that usually comes up regarding pain and unemployment is that, or you can tell me, okay, maybe someone doesn't work because they have a health problem that's bringing the pain and that doesn't allow them to work. Well, that's not the case in this case. So we rule out statistically that possibility.
I've seen people become really quite poorly and it's come out of nowhere. And then, it does become like a really long-term thing. And then actually the medication and different things then cause more of the problem. So are we looking at certain demographics? Are there certain age groups?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a commonality between the majority of these people, or is it just society as a cross-section?
And there are 2 points, I think, to that question. One is that around 40% of all the people around the world are experiencing some kind of pain, like this pain that it's like a temporary feeling. How much pain did you feel right now, and so on. So it's kind of an important phenomenon worldwide. And then if we look at specific groups of the population, the research shows that, for example, women tend to experience greater levels of pain than men, and specifically during recessions. And that could be connected to the role that women have in the household and all the mental load that's connected to managing a household during a recession when resources are scarce. There could be also biological differences. Another group, if we look at the age distribution, we could see that older people report greater pain than younger people. And that might be because they might have more health problems, simply they are old, and so on. But an interesting finding regarding age is that the trend in pain, that means that the level of pain has been increasing more and more over time. The trend in pain is fastest among the middle age group than in the group of the younger people and in the older people. Levels, older people report greater pain than younger people, but pain has been increasing fastest in the middle age group. Eventually, in the future, when we have more data, we can see that if the levels switch when we go up in the age distribution. But that's an interesting finding. So it's important to know that the pain is increasing in people in middle age. So there's something going on regarding pain that it's not related, that is not biological specifically, that is not related to age or having more health problems.
And that's really interesting. I know you're an academic, so you don't think what's going on, you use the data, but what do you think could be at play there? Because I do get the sense, and we kind of touched on it earlier, that it just feels so stressful. I think since 2008, there's been one crisis after another. Like it's been like a perma crisis. And then we went into all these big referendums and big elections. And now every election feels like a big moment. And it comes down to that employment thing that you're talking about, that although on one hand, you're not affected by it, on the other hand, you're absolutely affected by an election. But in your everyday life, that doesn't stop your life in any way, shape or form. And policies, in most cases, it's all slow burn, but it's a slow burn smolder that kind of feels like it has just never gone out. So since the crash of 2008, it just kind of feels like we were coming back. Then we had Brexit in the UK. Then everything kind of turns upside down. Then we had America.
Mhm.
Then it went back. And then we've had wars, just so much stuff that just feels ever permanent. Is that behind it? Because we're also seeing things like rising cancer in like middle-aged groups and younger people. Are we literally polluting our environment with stress?
Yes, that's a great point, and that speaks to the first question that I get in a conference, for example, when I say, okay, pain trends have been increasing, blah blah blah, and people tell me like, we are in a world that it's way more developed than 10 years ago. Why people are having more pain now than before? And one of the potential answers that we still don't know because we don't have enough data to really test those things, so it's quite early, let's say, to look at like long-term trends. That's also connected to what you said at the beginning. So there are many adverse events happening in the world all the time, one after another. And an important point there is that now we have access to those things because we always had wars. There was always hunger. There was always like political issues and so on. But now we have access to that mainly due to social media and globalization and the internet and so on. The point that they have in common is that they bring uncertainty to us. So we don't know what will happen in the future. And uncertainty is one of the worst enemies of stress. And as a result, based on our research, also of the physical pain. So yeah, the short answer is yes.
And I think that for some people will make them feel quite hopeless in a sense because we're not in control of those macro events. And it was interesting. I was talking to someone the other day on a podcast, kind of about a similar thing, but about the news and the constantness of the 24/7 rolling news that just doesn't stop, and your phone in your hand that just doesn't stop. Messages, emails, people wanting to talk to you, people wanting to ask you things, people wanting to sell you things, all of these different things. And it does just feel like before, in a world where you closed your door and you retreated inside and the news came on at three specific times in the day, the newspapers came out in the morning, that was it. We were exposed to less stress. And I think, as you say, in the current climate, you can see why so many people are feeling it. But because we don't link it to stress necessarily, we kind of do, but we kind of, back to the first thing, we kind of don't. I think a lot of people are not aware that actually maybe they are stressed. I think some people don't know they're stressed because it's just going on all the time. But if someone does suspect that their physical pain is linked to stress, we've ruled out a lot of those medical things. What are some ways that the research says, if it does, that we can try to alleviate this stress? Because we can't change that, what's going on in the elections, but how do we create some distance? Are there ways that we can do that?
Yeah, there are a lot of things to say based on what you just said. So I think the first thing that comes to my mind is that exactly as you said. So in the past we had to do something to read the newspaper, and now everything comes to us, and everything comes to us in very fast way that we cannot assimilate, and that brings stress, anxiety. Well, not even to mention social comparison in social media and all those things that we are exposed to when we just get on our phone or something like that. So now we have to do something to put that away versus to get access to that. That's the difference with the past. And that could also speak to the increasing in stress levels and pain. What can we do to alleviate these situations? So we can engage in behaviors that have been found to be associated or that have been found to increase mental well-being. There are the typical examples or suggestions like CBT, any other type of talking therapy or meditation. We also have now what's called social prescribing. In a healthcare setting, you might go to the doctor, and if you experience this type of pain, the doctor might prescribe that you go to a community service to do some gardening, a book club, or something like that, that increases your sense of belonging, sense of community and social connection. And that could maintain your stress within the limits and, as a result, your pain. You could also do some gratitude exercises and this type of things and make you feel like grounded at some point to reduce the stress and the pain related stress eventually.
It is so interesting, isn't it, that belonging is such a piece of this, because in a world that we've never been so connected, it is so easy to reach out to literally anybody and everybody, and yet so many people are feeling disconnected, that lack of a sense of belonging. And there is a part of me that thinks that must hurt, that must bring pain, just being isolated. It's like we're not understanding how community led we actually are as people. And we're living this life where we play at community. So we go on social media and we play at being a community. But actually, I'm not quite sure that we live it. Do you think the people who feel physical pain, do they understand that that's what's happening to them, or do they think it's something else?
I think it's very difficult. As I said, something like sometimes people feel stress and they don't know that they feel stress, and that's related to this. It's very difficult for someone, or let's say it requires a lot of work to really understand what your situation is. So you might feel, I'm very connected, I belong to this, and this online group, whatever. But then what matters, in fact, at the end of the day, is the quality of your social connection, not the quantity. It's not the same talking to someone in person or doing some gardening with your neighbors than playing a game online. There are online interventions, and I'm now working on one with my team, and we are considering the social connection component because that's key. Sometimes we experience negative emotions or pain, but we don't know, or we think that we have everything under control. This is also why, connected to the point that sometimes people cannot realize that they feel stressed. That's why we argue that pain should be a marker of mental ill-being, because it's easier for you to say, okay, I have neck pain, and then in the second step, we can investigate where that neck pain comes from. I might be able to say, okay, maybe that's due to stress. Let's investigate what's going on. But if I ask you, are you stressed? You can say, no, I'm fine. I just have neck pain.
I just think it is a world, it prioritizes productivity.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes the low hum of stress, people just think it's just being busy, or that this is the way they should be operating. And I've been thinking a lot recently about joyful productivity, which is that it's not a grind.
Mm-hmm.
Because on a level, we do have to be productive. You have to work, you have to earn money if you can, we have to cook, we have to find a way to nourish our bodies. There's a certain level of productivity that life just requires. But actually, how do we balance what I think is kind of like hyper productivity, which I think a lot of people then go into? A woman I once knew called it being a busy fool. So you're kind of busy, but not actually achieving much. So how do we begin to balance the need to be productive on some level, but then we're also at the same time, I think a lot of us storing up this stress. It's almost kind of like there's no outlet, there's no pressure valve. It's just in. And if we're not recognizing it or not taking the time to think about it, how can we balance that with we have to work? And it's not about rest. I don't think it's, a lot of people talk about rest, and I understand what they're saying and I believe in rest, but I don't think that's the antidote to the stress necessarily.
Yeah.
Rest, if that makes sense.
That's a very good point. In fact, there's a paper that was published a couple of years ago, and they show that active rest is better for well-being than just passive rest. Or I don't remember exactly the terms that they used. And the idea was learning language, for example, can help you to lower your stress levels more than just laying or sleeping, for example. Of course, we all need to sleep 8 hours a day and all those things that we all know. Resting is not the same as doing something that can help you to reduce your stress levels. And sometimes we say, okay, I don't want to go to the gym, for example, or I don't want to go for a walk because I want to rest. Maybe go for that walk because it will help you to reduce your stress levels. And then you will be able to properly rest in a better way than if you miss that walk, for example.
Yes. When I took up golf thinking it would reduce my stress, it has made me more stressed than ever learning to play golf. But generally speaking, when I play golf, I don't look at my phone as much.
Yeah.
I'm outside. Hopefully it's sunny, but the weather's coming back for it. But sometimes I walk along and I'm like, what an opportunity, because I don't think I would give myself 4 hours of walking on a normal day. Yeah. I would not do that for myself. And if I lay down on my sofa for 4 hours of a day, that would seem like a wasteful day. But actually the active thing of walking, doing something I'm enjoying outside in nature is restorative to me, even though it stresses me out when I'm not playing well. But overall, it's a very restorative activity. I think active rest is something that, you're right, we don't talk about active rest enough. It's either rest as in do nothing or get a massage or different things. But even I like to meditate, for instance, and I have noticed, because I started doing it after my workout, I work out, I cool down, I lay on the mat, and then I meditate. And actually, I find my mind much more engaged in the meditation. What do we need to change fundamentally about the language that we're using around stress? What would be helpful for us to not just be lumping things in big baskets? but actually to be embracing the nuance in this conversation?
Yeah, I think the first step would be to acknowledge that stress is something useful. Although in the literature, in the science, we call it negative emotions, stress is telling us something. It's telling us that something that we are doing, whether it's working too much, waking up too early, working out too much, and not eating properly, whatever, that's generating that stress. That stress is telling us that we are doing something that is not helping us, first of all. So maybe it's an indicator that something is not going well and that we need to make changes. I know that you might say, okay, but how do I know when I feel stressed and so on? That's another. It requires different set of skills or internal work, let's say. First, acknowledging that that's useful, and then trying to engage in things that will reduce that stress. It could also be through distraction. So we could say, okay, if I go for a walk, maybe I'm just distracted, but that's also helpful. So the mechanism in these cases is not that important. And then the other important point is that you said sometimes I want to play golf and I want to play well and I want to, well, you didn't say this, but we want to be the best at something. Sometimes too much of a good thing, it increases the stress instead of reducing it. So if we pick up a new hobby, okay, we want to improve and that's part of human nature, but let's not get crazy to be the best at something that we are just started, because that would be worse for us. So we have to be very conscious about what we do, how we do it, whether that's contributing in a good or in a bad way to our stress.
The golf was definitely going in the wrong direction. Actually, I was talking to a professor of neuroscience and he does a lot around golf mindfulness. I've had to get into golf mindfulness so that I can play golf. And he just said, you have to be present in it. Like, don't worry about making your swing look perfect. Have an emotional, spiritual, a physical, a mental connection to what you're doing in this moment and just enjoy it. And the golf will be easier. And it's so true, because when I do that, actually the golf is better because I'm not stressing myself out. But this kind of leads nicely into my next question. Wellness culture is booming.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, I think some of the ways we focus on wellness is making us more stressed. I think about my sleep tracker, prime example. Yeah. So I've been pretty much a lifelong insomniac. I've never been a good sleeper. I've been under consultant care for my insomnia. They said to me when they signed me off, basically, there's no cure, really. He said, you just have to reimagine what a good night's sleep is for you. You do your sleep hygiene. But he said, 8 hours a night, that's not really achievable for you. He said it's the quality. What you want to have is good quality sleep. It might not be long, but if it's quality, it's still restorative. Mm-hmm. In some way, shape or form. So that's my aim. But having a sleep tracker, I stopped wearing it for a really long time. Reason being, I was noticing that I would wake up in the morning and look at my tracker to tell me how I feel. So I would look at the tracker and say, I didn't have a good sleep, rather than when I wake up, do I feel in some way refreshed or restored?
Yeah.
Because actually sometimes it might not have been a long sleep, but it gave me what I needed. I think that wellness can actually make us more stressed, because then this becomes your master in terms of understanding how you feel rather than the internal thing. Even in the golf, I said to him, I think I want a tempo tracker so I can hear my tempo. And he said, you don't need a tempo tracker. Your body knows the tempo.
Yeah.
He said, your body knows. Mm-hmm. How can we not get kind of drawn into these things that are meant to help and they're meant to show us something and be data, but we're probably actually leaning on it for more than data? How do we not get pulled into that trap?
Sometimes we become slaves of all those devices that are out there that give us data, and it happens, as you said. So sometimes I feel, I didn't have a good night's sleep, and I wake up very tired and look at my tracker and I slept 8 hours, but I'm not feeling well. And that's what matters, because I think it's important for us to be conscious that the way we feel will dictate our behavior and decisions, not what's in the tracker. So it doesn't matter how many hours I slept if I woke up tired for whatever reason. Maybe I woke up in the middle of the night and the tracker didn't pick that up, but then I'm tired and I will be sleepy the whole day. I won't be productive. I won't feel well, which is the most important thing here. So, and it also, I think the role of the tracker depends on what's your relationship with this type of data, because it can generate more anxiety. You might want to become perfectionist and say, okay, I woke up tired, but this is measuring that I'm sleeping right. What can I do to improve that? And maybe you just need to forget those numbers and really trust how you feel, instead of using them to dictate your life and your decisions. I would say that the way you feel is the way you feel. That's the predictor of your behaviors and decisions and your productivity and your further well-being and so on, not the data. If they match, that's fine. If they don't, I would trust yourself versus the data.
I think we've become so used to, as you say, the devices, and I think we've become, well, I'll speak for myself. I think sometimes I've become less in tune with myself because I'm looking at the other markers to tell me. But you feel when you look at the data that you've done the right thing, you've ticked off the box. We love getting those circles all filled in, and we like the ticks and the have you worked out every day this month? I like turning all the circles blue, and all of those things. But actually, in the end, sometimes I have to force myself to just break the streak, even if I want to work out, so I don't become tied into not letting this streak die, when actually sometimes my body might genuinely just need a rest. It might need to not work out today.
Yeah.
But the wellness culture has turned into another perfectionist master that has us bouncing on one leg and patting our heads and rubbing our belly whilst we doing it all in the name of de-stressing. It's been really interesting to think about stress, and I think it's just something really interesting for people to consider whether or not they actually are stressed. Because I think a lot of people, like I mentioned earlier, they just think this is how life is. This is how it shows up for me, and this is how I show up to life. And they don't question it. So I have two final questions. What is an area of compassion for people who have stress-related pain, or think they might have stress-related pain, or pain that there's no medical thing for? And also, what is an area of challenge for us in this stress-filled world to really not just play at wellness, but to try to be well?
So in the compassion area, I would say maybe the answer is the same for both areas, for both questions. Because in the compassion side, I would say trust yourself, trust what you feel, and then act accordingly versus all the objective data and so on that we have out there, or those standardized suggestions like sleep 8 hours. So trust yourself and do what you think is better for you and what feels better for you, what feels nice to you. And I think that's exactly the challenge, to allow ourselves to feel and to trust what we are feeling and to discover what we are feeling versus paying attention to the objective metrics or trying to fit in a suggestion in what other people are doing, in working out every day, and so on. So I would say that could be the same answer to both sides.
That is brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Actually, it's given me a lot to think about in terms of how I'm approaching life and how I'm approaching wellness and relaxation, and what I think is relaxing and what I think is rest versus actually what is restful activity for me, and how can I be the best judge of that myself rather than general advice that is not helpful, because the world is stressful. So thank you so much for joining me.
No, thank you for having me, and I hope it's helpful for everyone.
Thank you so much for listening. I don't know about you, but that gave me a lot of food for thought. When I think about myself and probably the low level hum of stress is in the background that I just ignore, and what that is potentially storing up for me, I'm going to have a real good think about what are actually mindful activities that I can take that are giving me active rest. I think it's just not really something I've thought about. I'm either playing golf or I'm sat on my sofa binge watching 50 million episodes of Yellowstone or whatever else I'm watching at the time. And actually, I don't think I've considered that neither of those things are rest, and neither of those things are diffusers of stress. And to live a longer, happier, healthier life, part of what I wanted this podcast to be, like, how can we be more connected? And even the focus on belonging is so interesting to me, that a big cause of stress is not belonging, is not having community, and that gratitude is a really big part of what could make that better, is really, really interesting to me. And you may or may not have seen, but there's a gratitude app and I have a community there. And I would love for you to join me on that gratitude app, where 10 things a day that we are grateful for. It's an amazing opportunity to, one, find some belonging with other people who want to be grateful, and use that as part of diffusing stress and understanding there are good things happening in life, and also just a great way to tune into the good things that are happening for you. So thank you so much for listening. There'll be links to Lucia's work in the show notes as well, so you get access to her academic papers and the other things that she's written about. I think this is really rich research, and I think we should pay attention. And if you've enjoyed this episode, if there's someone that you think needs to hear this, please do share it. Like, subscribe, rate, leave your comments, leave your feedback. It means so much to me because it means more people can find out about the podcast. And also I can keep attracting great guests like today for these really enriching conversations. So thank you so much for listening once again, and I will see you next time.